I'm Spencer Mazyck, and joining me now is law professor turned acupuncturist Clare Dalton. She has offices in Cambridge and Fort Point Channel, Massachusetts. Welcome, Clare. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
So, Clare, first, I want to talk about your legal career. Did you begin it as a practitioner at Covington and Burling?
Actually, I'd had 3 years as a teacher at the University of Connecticut Law School before, 1 year in Connecticut and then 3 years at American University in Washington, D.C. before I joined Covington and Burling.
And what type of law did you practice in those early days, and did you enjoy practicing law?
I did, indeed. I began my teaching career very young, and so it felt important to establish more credibility as a practitioner, especially since I'd grown up in England and wanted more experience in the American legal system. And so I worked in litigation at Covington, handled some cases involving air crashes, also did some work in regulatory areas like in chemical manufacturing and also with the railroads.
So you were at first at Connecticut, then to American, and then to the law firm, and then back to teaching. So tell us about that transition.
Yes. Well, I think I had always intended to go back to teaching. And Covington was known as a firm where there was that sort of ready transition between practice and academics. And so after a few years at the firm, my husband and I moved to Massachusetts. And I began teaching at Harvard.
And after Harvard, you went on to Northeastern Law School. So, Clare, in total, how many years have you taught law?
That's a question I should have prepared for. I suppose it would be more than 30.
Wow, 30 years, that's a long time. And of course, we would be remiss if we didn't mention your sex discrimination lawsuit against Harvard Law School for its failure to provide you with tenure. How did that situation impact your life?
Obviously, substantially. I was very fortunate to have a lot of support, both inside Harvard Law School and also in the broader legal community. So that I think whereas those kinds of fights can be really soul-destroying, for me it was a growing up in a sense. I mean, I was in my 30s when it happened, but it was really a maturing process. I had to have, confidence in myself. I had to provide support to my supporters, if you can understand that, because they feel stronger and more able to be of assistance if they feel as if the person at the core of the maelstrom, if you like, is also solid. And I came out of it also with a wonderful job offer at Northeastern University and a settlement from Harvard, which enabled me to increase by a lot the funding that we had for domestic violence programs at the law school. So in every way...
You used that settlement to start the Domestic Violence Institute, and why was it important for you to actually create that organization?
Ever since I grew up in England in the 60s, I had been very interested in gender discrimination, in women's rights. I was late to the domestic violence movement, but came to understand it in part because students at Northeastern helped to educate me, I have to say. Helped me understand that it really was the most fundamental form of oppression of women. So with urging from the students, we had started programs, and then the money from the Harvard settlement allowed us to expand, and then we began to get federal funding. And so we were able to grow the Domestic Violence Institute at Northeastern into quite a substantial advocacy and education model.
And is it still going strong today?
My second in command, who took over from me as director when I left, has just herself retired. The programs will continue, but I think it's also important with social movements to recognize that each generation needs to choose its own issues. And if for a new generation of students and teachers, there's something else that rises to the top of the agenda, I don't think any institution should be committed to the past. So I would say that even if the programs aren't as robust in the future, and partly that's because federal funding has diminished, that's okay. That's okay, because good work will be done, and it'll be done on important issues.
So Clare, tell me this, when did you begin thinking about leaving academia for acupuncture?
I've thought a lot about this, obviously, you know, at many points along the journey, but again in preparation for today. And one of the things I recognize is that I was just becoming restless. I was beginning to feel that I should hand over the baton at the law school to the next generation. My children were grown and out of the nest. I found that I was taking on other activities that were nurturing me. I began taking yoga classes and Tai Chi. I actually did a one-woman show as Virginia Woolf in a room of one's own. And so I could see that something was shifting and that perhaps a change was needed. Then I was having health issues. There were various stresses in my life. I mean, most of us usually do have them, but they were taking a toll on my back and on my gut. And a friend recommended acupuncture. It was really miraculous for me. And I will say right away that I know we choose our modalities, and acupuncture isn't for everyone. But for me, it was life-changing. And
Clare,
I got intrigued.
Is it true that as a teenager, though, you were somehow interested or developed a strong interest in Eastern philosophy and acupuncture, or medicine, I should say?
Well, it wasn't really acupuncture then, but it was Eastern philosophy, Buddhism, a sort of funny British version of that called Theosophy, that had adherents like George Bernard Shaw back in the 20s. Yes, it is true. And I'd always been interested in alternative medicine. So now I can weave a narrative that shows a consistent thread. But obviously, you know, at the time I was deciding on a major at university and on my first career option, there was a fork in the road, and I took the much more linear, rational road into law.
So how did you ultimately, though, arrive at the decision to stop teaching to become an acupuncturist?
It was very gradual. I began my acupuncture education still teaching part-time. Eventually I had to do a clinical year in my training, and I got a leave of absence for that. I came back and continued to teach a little bit while I studied for the national certification exams. And then when I had my license, I finally made the break. What I said to myself was that at some level this seemed like a crazy thing to be doing, and that if at any point the obstacles just felt insurmountable, that would be the message that I wasn't ultimately meant to do this.
Were there any financial concerns about leaving the law school?
No, and again, I'm very fortunate in my position. I had been paying into my, teacher's retirement account, since the age of 23. So I had and have a financial cushion. Also, while my husband and I were married, we had a, relatively secure economic time of it. We built investments. So I have the luxury of being able to practice as much or as little as I want, to be generous with my time. I know a lot of younger colleagues who have to make a living at this, and it forces them to make compromises sometimes about how they provide care. And I feel incredibly blessed that financial considerations haven't been a part of this transition for me.
Clare, I know that you have 2 sons, so what did they think about your career change?
They reacted very differently. My older son is also an academic. He has jumped through all the hoops and is a wonderful person with a very strong social conscience. And he too balances his academic life with social activism. But for him, it was like, what? You know, what's going on here? My younger son is a rule breaker. He dropped out of high school halfway through his sophomore year. He knew exactly what he wanted to do. He's built a career in which at the age of 28, he's earning at least twice as much as I ever earned as a law professor. And for him, I think it was as if I was validating his choices. And indeed, I said to him that he was an inspiration, you know, that you could be brave enough to just step out of the mold and follow your heart or follow your passion.
Have you gotten either one of them to take your sessions in acupuncture?
Oh, I don't actually believe in providing continuous care to close family members. I think that's dangerous. But I have given them both more what I would call sort of first aidy kinds of treatments. You know, if they're coming down with a cold or stomach upset, then I've given them just one-time treatments to try to help out in that kind of a context.
So how would you describe your acupuncture practice? Is it in part holistic?
What acupuncture does is to access energy meridians that run through our body. In fact, the Chinese would say that those energy meridians actually create our body. You know, we are energy. So it's very close to sort of quantum physics, if you like. So with the needles, you access those channels of energy and you try to clear blockages, you try to strengthen energies, you try to bring energy into balance. And that certainly operates at the levels of body, mind, and spirit. So I can see anyone from, you know, the young person who's suffering from stress at work or irritable bowel syndrome, to an older person who's struggling to keep their heart pressure below the level at which they would need to take medication, someone who's depressed or is suffering from anxiety, really a very broad range of issues, some of them emotional and some of them more strictly physical.
And finally, Clare, I know that you are no longer teaching law, but do you think you might teach again in the future? But at this point, it would just be Eastern medicine.
No, I am much too humble about the length of time I've been doing this and the amount of learning I've been able to do. There are people out there who've been doing it for decades who should be the teachers. But what I will say is that because I have this legal background, there are people who come to me for acupuncture who otherwise might not have been willing to try it because they trust someone who was trained in a more conventional Western discipline. And so I do feel as if I have a role as educator in that way, helping people just recognize the foundations for Chinese medicine and that this is a modality that they can trust and expect to get benefit from.
Well, we hope that your business continues to thrive. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Again, thank you for giving me the opportunity.
For more information on this or other topics, subscribe to BloombergLaw.com. You can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Thank you for joining us. Bye, everybody.